My name is Meg Sheehan, and I am with the North American Megadams Resistance Alliance.
Okay. What is the Megadam Resistance Alliance?
It is a coalition of groups based in the Northeast United States and in Canada, and we're working across the international boundary to raise awareness in the U.S. about the negative impacts of hydropower from large dams that are in Canada.
Wow. I've read a bit about Canadian hydropower. How long has that issue been going on?
That issue has been going on since the 70s and really in Canada since the 1930s. But we really saw an explosion of megadam hydropower and exports to the U.S. in the 70s. And in the 1990s, there was a big expansion and proposed expansion in the Canadian province of Quebec, and there was a very large resistance to that, and that included resistance from the indigenous communities of the Cree Nation in Quebec. But today there is a resurgence of interest on both sides of the border by certain politicians and government officials who believe that they can call this hydropower clean and green and carbon-free and renewable when actually it is anything but renewable and clean and green.
So hydropower, it sounds good. I mean, you're not using fossil fuels, right? So what's wrong with hydropower?
Oh, lots of things. It's certainly not clean and green. Recent science is showing that the methane emissions from reservoirs are much higher than originally thought. The issue of methylmercury poisoning of the environment and the wild foods that are relied upon by Indigenous people for their subsistence way of life is a long-standing issue in Canada. This occurs when reservoirs are flooded and when dams are operated. Naturally occurring methane is released into the water column, enters into the water, and is converted to methylmercury, which is a lethal neurotoxin. It enters the food chain all the way up from the fish to the seals and to the whales that people rely on. And the flooding of these reservoirs and the operation of the dams causes methylmercury poisoning. And in addition, the real issue from our perspective is the fact that most of these mega dams have been built and are continuing to be built on Indigenous lands. There were a lot of land grabs in Canada where Indigenous communities did not give free, prior informed consent to have their lands taken, and the flooding that has been caused by the dams and the diversion of major wild rivers has resulted in the destruction of millions of acres of boreal forest, peatlands, and of course rivers have been diverted and destroyed, never to be known again in their wild state. And so to call hydropower renewable when the rivers have been destroyed, the forests have been destroyed, and the ecosystems and the ways of life of the Indigenous people who relied on those lands for their traditional hunting and gathering and their spiritual connection to the land is anything but clean and green.
Build is more than a conference. What do you think of it?
I think the convergence was great. It's really quite incredible. The connections that were made, people I haven't seen in a very long time. I actually connected with an Indigenous woman from Manitoba who is in the same community there with other Indigenous women that I've been working on this hydro issue with for a while. And so the commonalities that we have and the connections has made this a very powerful event.
Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to talk about?
I would like to emphasize that the reason I'm working on this is because there are several corridors, transmission corridors, being built or promoted in New England, where I live in New Hampshire. One of them is going through Maine, and there's a lot of opposition to that transmission corridor. There's also one that's proposed to go to New York City. And the governors of the New England states are buying into this false greenwash narrative that this is clean and green renewable energy. And they are not considering the impacts on the environment and the local communities in Canada. And that's what we're trying to raise awareness about and connect the dots between those communities and those environments and the so-called clean and green hydropower that's going to be delivered to New York City and Boston.
Do you have a website or anything you would like to share?
Yes, it is www.northeastmegadamresistance.org.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.